In Geraldton, Western Australia, a windy town famous for its golden grasslands stretching to the horizon and kangaroos skipping about like gray-brown spots on the sun, Ethan Moore and his family live on a small farm nestled on the edge of a peaceful suburb. Ethan grew up with the smell of hay, the sound of wind sweeping across the hills, and the clatter of kangaroos at night, so his love of nature was as natural as breathing, along with the habit of stopping his work to watch a flock of green-winged parrots swoop down into the acacia bush. That summer, when the sky was red like late-day embers and the smell of hot earth lingered, Ethan climbed the small hill behind the farm to watch the sunset fall on the grass, where the shadows of the trees stretched out like long purple carpets. On the rustling grass, he suddenly stopped when he saw a tiny, red creature huddled and shivering like a lost seed, and his heart suddenly ached as if someone was holding it. Closer, Ethan realized it was a newborn kangaroo, a joey with barely any fur, eyes half closed, and a body so fragile he feared the wind might shatter it. In this part of the world, Western gray kangaroos could weigh up to 70 kilograms and were usually docile but occasionally aggressive, while normal kangaroos would stay safely in their mother's pouch for the first months of their lives as they perfected their bodies and survival reflexes. In times of danger, mother kangaroos were sometimes forced to abandon their young to escape, a harsh choice of nature, and Ethan thought that this little one's mother must have panicked and run off into the sea of yellow grass. He looked around, calling softly, listening for the rustle of dry grass and distant footsteps, but there was no sign of an adult kangaroo, only the sighing wind and the fading dusk. Unable to wait, Ethan took off his coat, wrapped the little creature in his arms to keep it warm, pressed it to his chest so it could hear its heartbeat, and then carried it home like a dying fire. The Moore family, people who loved animals like family, agreed to help him take care of the joey as soon as they saw it, because they understood that in the vast wilderness, the chances of survival for a baby that fell out of its pouch were slim. They named it Sunny, hoping that the name of warmth and vitality would act as a talisman for the little girl to get through the long, cold nights. In the early days, taking care of Sunny was no different from taking care of an exhausted child. Ethan mixed warm milk with a small bottle, learned how to hold the joey's position to suckle without choking, and patiently counted each fragile breath. At night, he lined a soft bag with an old blanket to simulate a mother's pouch, put Sunny in it, and placed it right next to the bed so that every time it moved, he could gently pat it. Early in the morning, when the dew was still on the leaves, Sunny stretched out, rubbing her head to find Ethan's warmth, making small ch-ch sounds like whispers, making him laugh with simple happiness. Day by day, Sunny's body gradually changed. The short gray fur began to cover her red skin, her long ears stood up to catch the wind and the vague sounds in the garden, like the buzzing of bees or the light flapping of birds' wings. In just a few weeks, she learned to stand and jump in the house, walking slowly on the wooden floor. Each time she jumped lightly, the whole family would burst into laughter because of her clumsy appearance, like a wrong musical note suddenly becoming adorable. Knowing that the young grass in the yard was something a joey needed to get used to, Ethan took Sunny out to the yard when the early morning sun was still gentle, letting her touch the grass, smell the grass, and learn to balance with her long wobbly tail. Sunny clung to Ethan like a shadow, following him from the chicken coop to the fence, from the vegetable garden to the barn, considering him the only support in the vast world that was both strange and scary. Whenever she felt sleepy, she would crawl into Ethan's arms, head down, and he learned that the peace of mind of a living being only needed a place to lean on and a heartbeat to match. As her body grew, Sunny showed intelligence. She got used to calling her name, knew how to crawl closer whenever Ethan raised his hand, and knew how to spoil by wrapping her legs around him when she wanted to be petted. In the afternoons, when Ethan worked in the garden, Sunny would jump around as if to show off her jumping power, sometimes tripping over a shovel or a straw basket and then springing up on her own, her eyes filled with surprise and pride. The affection between human and animal grew, like an invisible string tightening through every small gesture, every bowl of milk, every time her name was called and she responded, making the Moore family see Sunny as a true member. However, in Ethan's heart, there was still a calm voice. Kangaroos were not born to belong to humans. They need herds, open spaces, wild rhythms, and lessons that only their own kind can teach. He understood that when Sunny was strong enough, the day would come when he had to let her go so she could return to nature, where she belonged and was free to develop fully as an individual. By the 4th month, Sunny was muscular, her eyes were bright, her hind legs were strong, her reflexes were quick, and Ethan knew that he could not hold on to the little patch of sunshine on the porch forever. One morning, the sky was as blue as the water, with a few white clouds drifting lazily. Ethan carried Sunny to the field where the kangaroos still gathered every afternoon, his hands shaking slightly like the first time he brought it home. He put Sunny on the ground, caressed her fur as smooth as young grass, and whispered farewell words that neither of them could fully understand, but their hearts understood. Sunny raised her head to look at Ethan, her clear eyes shining with regret, took a few steps, and then turned back, as if to ask him if this was the right thing to do. Ethan took a deep breath, scratched his chest to suppress the rising emotions, and nodded as if to make a promise that love does not bind, it only shows the way. Finally, Sunny jumped, as light as a piano key, towards the gray shadows of her fellow kangaroos waiting, and then her small figure gradually disappeared behind the yellow acacia range on the horizon. Ethan stood silently for hours in the windy meadow, his heart filled with a myriad of emotions, both proud of having done the right thing and empty as if someone had removed a familiar piece of the house. In the following days, he returned to the hill many times, looking for Sunny in the herd, listening for every slight sound. But in return, he was only met with silence and the whispering of the grass. Farm life continued with its usual rhythm, feeding the cows, mending the fence, watering the garden, gathering hay, and Ethan grew accustomed to an empty spot by the window where the blanket bag had been. Every sunset, when the sky was ripe, he remembered Sunny's last look, the look that had taught him a lesson about the courage of those who left and the steadfastness of those who stayed. 4 seasons passed, Geraldton changed its clothes. The rainy season turned the grass green, the dry season turned yellow, then the wildflowers were brilliant, migratory birds stopped by, and Ethan was busy, but the memory of a little Joey never faded. Sometimes at night, he dreamed of Sunny hopping around the porch, rubbing her head against his hand as before, and then waking up to hear only the sound of the wind and the faint scent of warm wood. One winter morning, when the cold was as thin as a blanket covering the yard, Ethan was startled by a strange noise coming from the front of the house, while the sun was still hesitant behind the clouds. He pulled back the curtains and held his breath as he watched the unbelievable sight. Nearly 30 kangaroos standing around the yard, their postures calm, their gentle black eyes reflecting the faint light of early morning. Ethan's heart pounded. He opened the door and stepped out, keeping a moderate distance so as not to frighten them, and at the same time searching for a figure that had been etched into his memory. Then, in the middle of the crowd, an adult female stepped forward, leaving a thin, pen-like scar on her hind leg, an old mark from years ago, and Ethan knew there was no mistake. Sunny had returned.
It tilted its head, its ears listening to the familiar breathing, then gently touched Ethan's hand. The same gesture as before, like the way people knocked lightly before entering the house. The surrounding kangaroos slowly approached, without any hesitation, as if they had received assurance from Sunny that this was an old and trustworthy friend, someone who had taken care of them and given them back their freedom. A playful baby jumped up, touched Ethan's shoe with its foot, and hopped around, making him laugh through his tears at the unexpected feeling of reunion in the cold season. Ethan sat down on the grass, letting Sunny smell his shirt, letting the baby play with the end of his shoe, and he clearly felt a warm current flowing through his chest like a rekindled fire. For him, that moment was not a distant miracle, but a closed circle. Kindness, when sown in the right place, will bloom on an unexpected day. The news spread quickly through the fences, the town cafes, and the farmers' market, and Geraldton residents came one after another, standing silently to witness the sight of a herd of kangaroos leisurely wandering around a farmyard, like a beautiful page in a book of their land.
The local press reported on the friend of nature, Ethan Moore, and the kangaroo Sunny. But to Ethan, the title was just a floating cloud. What mattered more was the peaceful look in Sunny's eyes as she stood beside him. He told everyone about his journey: the little milk bottle, the blanket bag, the first hops, the nights of coaxing, and the painful but right decision to set her free. A story that made children's eyes widen and adults smile.
Sunny stayed for half a day like an honored guest, walking around the chicken coop, standing in the shade of acacia, smelling the grass in the backyard, sometimes touching her head to Ethan's hand, as if to thank him one more time. At noon, the sunlight poured golden light. The kangaroos leisurely turned towards the grassland. Sunny followed behind, looking back many times. Each look was a thread extending from the field to Ethan's heart. Ethan stood there, watching each step away, his heart strangely calm, as someone who had just placed the last stone in the foundation of a spiritual house called trust. He understood that true love is not holding on tightly, but giving the best so that the other person can return to themselves. And if there is still fate, they will find their way back to you.
Since that day, Geraldton has become more famous for the story between Ethan and Sunny, not as a noisy miracle, but as a gentle reminder that humans and nature can stand in harmony. Children in town often visit the farm on weekends, sit around the porch listening to Ethan tell stories, learn how to observe footprints, how to read the wind, and how to cherish a blade of grass as a small creature. Ethan taught them to look at the kangaroo's erect ears to understand alertness, to keep a respectful distance, and to refrain from feeding indiscriminately so as not to disturb their wild habits. In the afternoons, when the shadows were long, he would take the children to the edge of the fields, showing them the kangaroo trails, explaining why silence was a gift.
The story of Sunny became a symbol of faith, that a difficult decision, if based on love and understanding, will eventually lead to peace. The Moores still lived simply, getting up early to feed the animals, fixing the roof of their barns when it rained, planting a few trees to provide shade. But in their hearts, there was a new light that carried Sunny's smile. Ethan would look out at the acacia range in the distance, where he had first seen Sunny disappear and where she had reappeared, like the blurred line between parting and reunion. Sometimes he caught sight of a gray shadow fluttering at the edge of the field, not sure if it was Sunny, but just the thought of it filled his heart with a feeling of protection. He wrote a few lines. "When we consider the freedom of others as the foundation of love, we will receive rare trust," and then put it between the dusty workbook.
A year later, on the day when the south wind blew strongly, the kangaroos visited the yard again. Sunny was still the leader of the group, and Ethan understood that this connection was no longer an anomaly, but a quiet ritual of gratitude. This time, the cub from last year had grown up, curiously jumped up, touched Ethan's calloused palm with its nose, and he laughed, seeing his own childhood reflected in those young eyes. When asked if Ethan regretted letting Sunny go, he shook his head, saying that if he had kept her that day, he would never have known the feeling of being trusted and sought out by nature. The lesson he left for the children was, kindness does not need to be ostentatious, nor does it demand immediate reciprocation. It took a detour, through the sunny season, the rainy season, and then returned at its best. And Sunny, in the town's collective memory, became a bedtime story about loyalty, about bridging the gap between humans and animals with strings of patience, respect, and freedom. Every year, when the wildflowers bloomed purple at the foot of the hill, Ethan would sweep the porch, fix the wooden chair, and prepare a bowl of water. Not to tame anyone, but to say that his door was always open for friends who knew the way home. He knew that life rarely gave us perfect songs, but the moment Sunny touched his hand in the morning sunlight was enough for an ordinary heart to carry a magical feeling for many years.
From then on, for Ethan, Geraldton was not only home, but also a place that kept a miracle. Proof that in the windy steppe, true love never disappeared. It just changed shape and returned with a turn of the head.
And every night, before closing the door, Ethan softly said a thank you that lingered on the tip of his tongue. Thanks to Sunny for not forgetting. Thanks to nature for answering. And thanks to himself for believing that true love always finds its way back.